missed my Uber. Or rather, my Uber driver went to the wrong pickup location. And rather than come to the right one, or at least give me time to go to him, he simply drove away, leaving me stranded and forced to walk 7 miles home. I wasn't too upset. I had at least gotten my money back for the unceremoniously cancelled ride. The weather was nice, cool and a bit breezy, but not annoyingly so. So, I put in my earphones and began my multi-mile trek. The first half of the walk was unexpectedly uneventful. It began a few minutes after noon, and there was the occasional midday jogger pumping along in the distance. But otherwise, I encountered no one on foot, and the cars which sped by paid me no mind. It wasn't until the final stretch, a roughly straight line to my apartment complex of about 2 miles, that I sensed something was off. Initially, it was merely a prickling of my skin, a sudden instinctive awareness of a follower, someone or something intentionally following my trail. But when I looked around, I saw no one, just the flat lots of an in-development residential area. A few minutes later, the feeling spiked, arising to an alarming degree of environmental sensitivity, to the point where I physically recoiled from some unknown presence, my body cringing in response to a threat not consciously perceived. I spun around, eyes wide, scanning the area, but saw nothing, found no one following me from any perceivable distance. There were no cars lingering at intersections or idling on either side of the road. I was completely, vulnerably alone. Sufficiently unsettled and unable to shake away the alarmed feeling, I decided to stop at the next place of business and order an Uber from there. I had less than 2 miles to go, but figured that I could just include a digital note in the reservation about paying a considerably generous tip for what would be a pretty pointless ride. A few extra bucks for my physical, or at least mental well-being seemed like a fair trade. Eventually, I spotted a gas station a few hundred feet ahead, and the uneasy feeling somewhat dwindled. I probably should have jogged there. I had no reason to continue a casual walk when I intensely feared some unseen pursuer. But I continued my unhurried stride, perhaps not wanting to look weird, jogging in my work uniforms and boots. My lack of expediency was, unfortunately, my downfall. Because my pursuer caught up to me. There was no sun in my eyes, no darkening of the area by a sudden accumulation of clouds, no dust storms or windswept debris, or anything else that could have rationally explained the sudden and complete cessation of my vision. For a second, if even that long, I lost sight, stared into absolute nothingness, and then the world was immediately and totally returned to me. But in that second, during that inexplicable lapse of sight, something seized and bit me. I felt teeth sink into my shoulder, felt the immense pressure as the ensnaring jaws clenched, sending those piercing tips through shirt, skin, and muscle, felt the inexpressibly invasive sensation of teeth impacting bone. And then, the release of pressure, the withdrawal of the teeth, coeval with the return of my sight. The pain was awful, without a doubt, but the fear was worse. The psychological trauma of having been bitten, not stung by a flying, craftily evasive insect, but bitten by something large enough to sink its teeth into my flesh from a height that was apparently comparable to my own. Pointlessly, I spun around, my eyes bouncing off every surface, desperately seeking to identify and subsequently flee from whatever had attacked me. But, as I'm sure you can guess, I saw nothing. There was no one on the road, nothing crawling across the ground or soaring through the sky. Overwhelmingly terrified, I ran. I made it to the gas station, where I bought some isopropyl alcohol and a cheap first aid kit, then went into the bathroom to take care of the wound I was sure I had. But upon examining myself in the mirror, I found nothing. The only evidence of the bite being the puncture holes in the shoulder of my shirt. There was no wound, no blood. And yet, I still felt the pain. The pressure from the jaw still lingered. The sensation of knife-point teeth touching my shoulder blade still an all too fresh memory. Seeing no reason to waste the first aid kit, I put it aside and poured a bit of alcohol on my shoulder. I pocketed that, returned the first aid kit, and headed outside, where I ordered a new Uber. As I waited, I scanned the area and horizon for signs of that unseen predator, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. My Uber arrived and took me home without incident. Hours later, while washing dishes after dinner, I noticed something odd and incredibly startling about my left hand. While rinsing out a bowl, my hand seemed to flicker from existence, leaving me to react in a somewhat silly way. My right hand, the one not holding the bowl, shot to it, thinking that the bowl would fall in the sudden absence of my left hand. This inadvertently caused me to knock the bowl from my left hand and send the glass container sliding across the counter until it fell off and shattered on the floor. A second later, my left hand became visible again. I attributed the bizarre phenomenon to tiredness and overwrought nerves. I was still frazzled by the incident earlier in the day, as anyone would be, and assumed that I was simply in need of rest. It didn't yet occur to me that there might be some connection between the bite and my hand's brief invisibility. Absent-mindedness and exhaustion, I reasoned, could cause people to not see objects or even know the people right in front of them. I quickly finished up the dishes, took care of a few nightly duties, and crawled into bed. The next morning, I woke up to find that my left arm, portions of my left leg, down to the kneecap, and about half my torso were missing. These areas of my body were of course there, physically, but I could not see them, saw only the impressed bedding beneath. There was no pain, but I nonetheless screamed, thrown into hysterics by the incomprehensible sight itself. With a mind refreshed by rest and sparked to activity by terror, I immediately drew a connection between this incomplete spectral dismemberment and the bite from the day before. That unseen predator had somehow infected me with its own latent or artificially produced ability, had imparted to me the capacity of total transparency, or at least unparalleled camouflage. Carefully, fearing that my partial invisibility would actually become an absence of body, I got out of bed and went to my bathroom, where I examined my eerily incomplete reflection. It was soul-chilling, seeing myself half-formed, the image inexplicably subtracted, yet not feeling any accompanying sensations of physical loss. I tried to reassure myself that the effect was purely optical, that my visually erased limbs still belonged to me. There was no question that this was reality, no doubt that I was awake, aware, and truly experiencing the unexplainable phenomenon. No dream had ever felt so real. I briefly considered going to a hospital, but dissuaded myself from that action for two reasons. The first, my appearance would nonetheless be noticed by whomever I called to give me a ride. While my invisibility was limited to my flesh, thankfully, I would not be able to reasonably justify wearing body-covering clothing to anyone who happened to ask prior to being examined by a healthcare professional. And that posed its own issue. Upon being examined, I would probably not be allowed to leave, made a subject of extensive study, most likely against my will. Invisibility or camouflage of this extent would of course attract the attention of the government and military, and the fledgling conspiracy enthusiast in me had no hard time conjuring up the idea that if I refused to cooperate, any number of unsolved crimes could be miraculously solved by introducing the presence of the invisible being into the equation. I did not go to the hospital. By 3 p.m. that day, only my chest, right arm, neck, and head remained visible in my reflection. Peering down and seeing nothing of myself, seeing only the floor chair beneath, was both terrifying and nauseating. I began to dissociate, to envision that I was truly disembodied, some floating specter, a ghostly echo pathetically clinging to the space once occupied by my body, incapable of letting it go and moving on to some higher or lower place beyond death. For hours, I stared at the walls and ceiling, laying back on my couch so that I did not accidentally gaze downward and see only the cushions, weighed down by some imperceptible thing. By 5 p.m., I was only a head. The floating face reflected in the mirror, frozen in an expression of mental exhaustion and grief. I grieved for my lost body, hurt spiritually for what felt like the erasure of my being, even though I was still tangible, still there in the traditional sense. I had not eaten since waking, hadn't dared to find out what would happen to anything I ingested while invisible. I researched the concepts of invisibility, cloaking, and camouflage, but nothing seemed entirely applicable to my situation. As far as I was aware, I had not yet genetically altered. There was no reason to believe I had spontaneously developed chromatophores, which allowed me to undergo some amphibian-like metacrosis. I noticed no refracting of light around me, or in my reflection, and there were no optical illusions powerful enough to even approach the level of transparency my body exhibited. There was no neurological or psychological affliction I found that might have explained my condition. At least, not with how rapidly it had developed. My case, my nightmarish condition, was unprecedented in the fields of medical science and physics. By 7 p.m., all that was reflected in the mirror was my right eye. And, as if my situation was not bad enough, I lost sight in my left one. But the absence of leftward sight was not total. That is to say, I ceased to see the normal world and began to see another, weirder world wherein the objects of my house were but faint, insubstantial shadows. Light, as a thing cast off, emitted or reflected, was replaced by darkness in this inverse world. Darkness was a thing alive. Objects and windows radiated shadows, bled darkness where light would have ordinarily shone. And all the while, my right eye saw the normal world. This duality of vision, this dark-light optical dichotomy, was no less horrifying than disorienting. The height of the horror, the event which sent me screaming into my bathroom to stare at myself, well, at my eye, as if that alone would have prevented me from vanishing, was when I saw that thing watching me from outside my bedroom window. The thing, standing on 2 legs, my legs which supported my body, on which sat my head, and on that head, in near perfect mimicry, was my face. A face, missing its right eye. I did not try to communicate with it, could not bring myself to react in any intelligent, rational way. Upon regaining a fraction of my composure, I fled to my bedroom and stayed there, locking the door and blocking it with a table. The inability to see the arms performing the action was not nearly as distressing as it would have ordinarily been, now that I'd seen to where the limbs had apparently gone. There was no audible indication that the doppelganger had attempted or was attempting to enter the home. For an hour, I sat on my bed, unthinking, scared beyond sense, and still seeing the creepily and darkened world along with the regular one. It is now 9 p.m., and the vision in my right eye has begun to wane, not in terms of acuity or sharpness, but as if the scope of sight is diminishing, like a peripheral rim steadily closing over my eye. The shadows of random objects seem to lengthen with each minute that passes, while the lights of my bedroom appear to lessen in luminosity with each blink. I think the darkness of my left eye is creeping into the right one. I've decided to write out my experience, in the hope that someone out there is warned, even if I cannot provide any real warning beyond watching out for yourself when you're walking alone. I think, given how fast my condition has accelerated, and with how little of myself remains visibly present, merely a pupil, I imagine that it's too late for me. What terrifies me the most is the uncertainty. What will happen once I'm completely invisible and my vision is immersed in that nocturnal realm? What will that thing do once it has my entire body? The lack of food, water, and the extreme unyielding fright have all combined to severely tire me. I don't think I can stay awake for long. And I know that when I wake up, if I wake up, I will not be visible. I will post this and hope that I will receive answers before I can only see that other, to neighbor's world, where my computer monitor is nothing but a rectangle of luminous darkness. I'm not sure. It may be my tired brain playing tricks on me. But I think, in a brief flash of regular, undarkened sight, I saw my own hand grasping the doorknob of my front door. Am I not already inside?